Lydia Harper dragged her feet through the fluorescent-lit aisles of the corner supermarket, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum floor. It was nearly 10 p.m. and her shift at the bar had stretched into 10 grueling hours of shaking cocktails and dodging drunk regulars. Her arms ached, her back screamed, and the $23 in her wallet felt like a cruel joke. Ethan, her 1-year-old, needed diapers badly. She'd already stretched the last pack way too thin, and the thought of another night scrubbing them in the sink made her want to cry. She dumped her basket on the conveyor belt. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a bruised apple, and the cheapest pack of diapers she could find. The cashier, a woman with a pinched face and a name tag reading Barb, scanned everything with robotic efficiency. "That'll be $25.47, Barb said, her voice flat as a pancake. Lydia fumbled with her wallet, pulling out crumpled bills and a handful of coins. She counted twice, her stomach sinking. "There's gotta be some mistake," she muttered, her cheeks burning as the line behind her grew restless. "I swear I had enough." But she didn't. Not even close. Barb didn't blink. "Cash or card?" Lydia stared at the diapers, her lifeline to a decent night's sleep, and felt her throat tighten. I'll put some stuff back," she said, barely above a whisper, reaching for the bread and apple. Her hands shook as she tried to ignore the impatient sighs behind her. That's when a voice cut through the hum of the store, deep, calm, and steady. "Hold on, I've got it." Lydia whipped around to see a man standing there, maybe mid-30s, in a dark jacket and jeans that looked worn but intentional. He wasn't flashy, but something about him, maybe the way he held himself, said money wasn't a worry. He slid a card across to Barb before Lydia could protest. "No, really, I can't," she started, but he waved her off with a small smile. "Everyone needs a hand sometimes. Don't sweat it." Barb swiped the card, and just like that, the bags were hers. "Thanks," Lydia said, clutching the plastic handles like they might vanish. "I'm Lydia, by the way." He nodded, his hazel eyes catching hers for a beat too long. "James Carter, nice to meet you." Then he paused, almost like he was weighing his next words. "I knew Nathan, actually, your husband." Lydia froze, her breath catching. Nathan, dead 10 months now, had never mentioned a James Carter, not once. "How did you—" she started, but James just gave a vague shrug. "We worked together a while back. I'm sorry for your loss." Before she could press him, he tipped his head and walked off, leaving her standing there, bags in hand, questions piling up like unpaid bills. Lydia shoved the grocery bags onto the chipped counter of her tiny apartment, the plastic rustling louder than it should have in the quiet. Ethan was asleep in his crib, thank God, his little chest rising and falling under a patched blanket. She should have been relieved. Diapers secured, a small win. But James Carter's words gnawed at her. I knew Nathan. How? Nathan had been a quiet guy, an IT grunt who fixed servers and grumbled about office coffee, or so she'd thought. She kicked off her sneakers and sank onto the sagging couch, replaying the encounter. That guy didn't look like some random coworker. He looked important. She grabbed her phone and dialed Sophie, her best friend and fellow bartender, who picked up on the third ring. "Lyd, you okay? It's late." Sophie's voice was groggy but warm, the kind of friend who'd listen even half asleep. "Yeah, I'm fine, sort of. Look, did Nathan ever mention a James Carter?" Silence stretched on the other end, then a rustle as Sophie sat up. "Carter? Nope, doesn't ring a bell. Why?" Lydia spilled it. The supermarket, the diapers, the bombshell about Nathan. Sophie whistled low. "Weird vibe. Be careful, okay? Guy sounds like he's got an agenda." Lydia hung up, her gut twisting. Agenda or not, she needed answers. The next morning, after dropping Ethan at the neighbor's, Lydia was wiping down sticky bar counters when James walked in. He didn't fit here, too put together for a dive like this, but he slid onto a stool like he owned it. "Morning," he said, setting a toy truck on the bar. For Ethan. Lydia eyed it, then him. You're stalking me now. He chuckled, not offended. Just passing by. Thought I'd drop this off. She didn't touch the truck. You said you knew Nathan. How? James leaned back, his easy smile fading. We were partners, sort of, back in Silicon Valley. Technova, heard of it? Lydia's jaw tightened. No. Nathan fixed computers, that's it. James shook his head. He was more than that. We started Technova together, a tech startup. Had big dreams, apps, AI, the works. Nathan was the brains, I was the hustle. We were close to cracking it, but things fell apart. She crossed her arms, skepticism dripping. Fell apart how? He hesitated, then said, money went missing, a lot of it. Company tanked. Nathan took the fall. Lydia's pulse spiked. To the fall? For what? James met her eyes, steady but guarded. To protect someone. He wouldn't tell me who. Said it was his mess to clean up. That night, after her shift, Lydia tore through the apartment, digging into the cardboard box of Nathan's stuff she'd avoided for months. Old shirts, a cracked phone, and then, buried under a stack of manuals, a scratched USB drive. Her hands shook as she plugged it into her ancient laptop. Files popped up, emails, spreadsheets, contracts. Technova's logo stared back at her, sleek and unfamiliar. She clicked an email from Nathan to James, dated 5 years ago. We can't let this ruin us. I'll handle it, trust me. Another file showed bank transfers. Huge sums drained from company accounts. Her head spun. Nathan hadn't just been some IT guy. He'd been in deep, and he'd lied to her about it. She scrolled further, landing on a name in a payroll doc. Ryan Brooks, Nathan's little brother. 25 now, but back then just a kid fresh out of college. He'd worked at Technova? Nathan had always said Ryan was figuring things out, bouncing between odd jobs. Why was his name on this? She grabbed her phone again, dialing Ryan's number. He answered, sounding hungover. Lyd? What's up? Her voice was ice. Technova, you worked there. What did Nathan take the fall for? Ryan groaned. Jesus, how'd you? Look, it's old news, can we not? She snapped. Tell me, Ryan, or I swear I'll drive to your dump of an apartment right now. He sighed, long and heavy. Fine. I screwed up, okay? I was in accounting. Got into gambling. Stupid bets, big debts. I borrowed from the company. Thought I'd win it back. Nathan found out, flipped his lid, but instead of turning me in, he said he'd fix it. Said Mom couldn't handle losing me too, not after her cancer scare. Lydia's chest ached, picturing Nathan's quiet stubbornness. So he tanked his life for you? Ryan's voice cracked. I didn't ask him to, he just did it. She hung up, tears prickling. Nathan, her Nathan, had carried this alone. But James knew too. Why hadn't he stopped it? She stared at the USB, its secret spilling open like a wound. Whatever James was after, he wasn't telling her everything, and she wasn't about to let him off the hook that easy. Lydia barely slept that night, the USB's glow haunting her every time she closed her eyes. Ryan's confession looped in her head, his whining voice, the gambling, Nathan's sacrifice. It made sense in a gut punch kind of way. Nathan had always been the protector, the one who'd rather break himself than let his family hurt. But James Carter? He was still a puzzle piece that didn't fit. If he'd been Nathan's partner, why hadn't he fought harder to stop this? Why was he here now, playing Good Samaritan with diapers and toy trucks? She needed to see him face to face. No more half answers. The next afternoon, after dropping Ethan with Sophie for a few hours, Lydia tracked James down at a coffee shop he'd mentioned liking. He was there, nursing a black coffee, looking too calm for a guy who'd just stirred up her world. She slid into the seat across from him, skipping the small talk. Ryan told me everything. The gambling, the money he took, Nathan covering for him. You knew, didn't you? James didn't flinch, just set his mug down slow. Yeah, I knew. Her nails dug into her palms. And you let Nathan take the blame? Some partner. He leaned forward, voice low but firm. It wasn't that simple, Lydia. When I found out what Ryan did, I went straight to Nathan, told him we could fix it, turn Ryan in, save the company. He begged me not to. Said his mom was dying, that she'd already lost enough with his dad gone. Ryan in jail would have killed her. Nathan made me promise to back off. Lydia's throat tightened. She remembered Nathan's mom, frail and fading, clinging to her boys like they were her lifeline. So you just walked away? James shook his head, a flicker of something, guilt maybe, crossing his face. I tried to help after, offered him cash, a job, anything to pull him out of the hole. He wouldn't take it, said he'd figure it out himself. You know how he was, stubborn as hell. Lydia did know. Nathan's pride had been a brick wall, even with her. And you? She pressed. You bounced back fine, didn't you? Technova's gone, but here you are, buying my kid toys like nothing happened. James looked away, jaw tight. I got lucky. Some old contacts hooked me up with new gigs. Doesn't mean I don't carry it. She wasn't buying the remorse act yet. Why show up now then? What's in it for you? He met her gaze, steady. I owed Nathan. When I heard he died, I couldn't shake it. Then I saw you at the store, struggling, and I don't know, Lydia. Felt like a chance to do right by him. She wanted to believe him, but the pieces still didn't add up. Nathan's death, 10 months ago, a rainy night, his car skidding off the road, had been ruled an accident. But if he'd been digging into something before, like Ryan hinted? That night, back at the apartment, Lydia dove into the USB again. She found a folder labeled MT buried deep. Inside were emails from Nathan to someone named Michael Tate. Short, tense messages. We need to talk about the accounts. Something's off. Another, I've got proof. Meet me tomorrow. The dates lined up. 2 weeks before the crash. Her heart thudded. Michael Tate. She Googled him. Big shot investor, Technova's main backer. A guy with slick suits and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Had Nathan confronted him? She called Ryan again, waking him up. Who's Michael Tate to Nathan? Ryan groaned. God, Lydia, it's 2 a.m. Answer me, she snapped. He sighed. Tate was our angel investor, pumped cash into Technova, but he was shady. Nathan didn't trust him, thought he was skimming profits. Kept it quiet, though. Her pulse raced. Did Nathan meet him before he died? Ryan went silent too long. Yeah, said he was going to sort it out. Next thing I know, she hung up, dizzy. This wasn't just about Ryan's mess anymore. Nathan had been onto something bigger. The next day, she cornered James at the bar during her break. Michael Tate, she said, watching his face. His eyes narrowed. What about him? Nathan was chasing him down before the crash. You know anything about that? James rubbed his neck, uneasy. Tate was dirty. I suspected he was cooking the books, but Nathan wouldn't let me dig. Said he'd handle it. Lydia stepped closer, voice sharp. Handle it how? By getting himself killed? James flinched. You think? I don't know what to think, she cut in. But I'm finding out. With or without you. He stared at her, then nodded slow. I'm in. Whatever it takes. She didn't trust him fully, not yet, but she couldn't do this alone. Nathan's ghost was pulling her deeper, and James, for better or worse, was her only lead. Lydia's hands trembled as she pored over the USB files again that night. Ethan's soft snores, a faint comfort in the background. The emails between Nathan and Michael Tate burned into her brain. I've got proof. Proof of what? She couldn't shake Ryan's words either. Nathan meeting Tate, then the crash. The cops had called it an accident. Wet roads, bad tires, case closed. But now, every line in those files screamed otherwise. She needed more than hunches. She needed James. The next morning she met him at a diner across town, far from the bar's prying eyes. He slid into the booth, looking rougher than usual, bags under his eyes, stubble creeping in. "You okay?" he asked, but she ignored it, cutting straight to it. Nathan wasn't just after Ryan's mess. He was on to Tate. These emails, he had something on him. She slid her phone across, showing the last message. "Meet me tomorrow, we're done playing." James read it, his face hardening. This was days before he died. "Yeah," Lydia said, voice tight. "And then he's gone. You still think that's a coincidence?" James leaned back, exhaling slow. "I didn't know he'd gone that far. Tate was a shark, always pushing shady deals. I warned Nathan to stay clear, but he wouldn't listen. Said he had to fix it." She glared. Fix what? What was Tate hiding? James hesitated, then dropped his voice. "I think Tate was laundering money through Technova. Big cash, off-the-book stuff. Nathan must have caught wind." Her stomach flipped. Money laundering? Nathan had been in over his head and she'd had no clue. So he confronted Tate and what, died for it? James didn't answer right away, just stared at his coffee like it held the truth. "I don't know, Lydia, but if Tate thought Nathan could sink him, he didn't finish. He didn't have to." She felt sick, rage bubbling up. "We need proof, real proof." James nodded. "I've got a guy, old friend from the valley, hacks systems for a living. If Tate's dirty, he'll find it." 2 days later, they met the hacker. Dax, a wiry dude with a buzz cut and a laptop that looked like he'd seen better days, in a basement apartment that smelled like burnt pizza. Dax barely glanced up as he typed. "Tate's smart, covers his tracks. But Nathan, he wasn't dumb either." His fingers flew, pulling up encrypted files James had snagged from Technova's old servers. "Here," Dax said, spinning the screen. "Bank records, offshore accounts, millions funneled through shell companies. One transfer, $50,000, hit a random account the day after Nathan's crash." Lydia's breath caught. "A payoff?" Dax smirked. "Looks like it. Traced it to a guy in Chicago. Exicon, does dirty work. Car's VIN from Nathan's wreck matches a hit-and-run report same night, buried by some cop on Tate's payroll." She gripped the table, dizzy. "He was murdered!" James put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "We've got him, Lydia. This ties Tate to it." But she wasn't done. "Why didn't you dig into this sooner? Nathan was your friend." James flinched, guilt flashing. "I tried. After the crash, I poked around, but Tate's people shut me down. Threats, lawyers, I backed off, figured it was over. Then I saw you and..." He trailed off. She didn't care about his excuses. "You should have fought harder," she snapped, shoving past him to the door. "I'm taking this to the cops." James grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. "Not yet. Tate's got reach. Cops, judges. We go public, he'll bury it again. We need more." She yanked free, glaring. "Then get it. I'm not waiting while that bastard walks free." He nodded, jaw tight. "Give me 48 hours. Dax can dig deeper. Phone records, witnesses, we'll nail him." The next night, alone, with Ethan asleep, Lydia found a note slipped under her door. No name, just scratchy handwriting. "Back off, or the kid's next." Her blood ran cold. She clutched Ethan's blanket, heart pounding. Tate knew. She called James, voice shaking. "Someone's watching me. They threatened Ethan." He was there in 20 minutes, face grim. "Tate spooked. Means we're close." He pulled out a USB Dax's latest haul. Got a voicemail, Tate telling some goon to clean it up the night Nathan died. "It's him, Lydia. We've got him." She listened, Tate's oily voice chilling her to the bone. "Make it look accidental, no loose ends." Tears stung her eyes. Nathan's last moments. Betrayed, alone. She looked at James, resolve hardening. "I don't trust you completely. but I can't do this without you. We end this for Nathan. He met her gaze, steady. For Nathan. And you. They had the proof now, a ticking bomb. But Tate wasn't going down quiet. Lydia hugged Ethan tighter that night, knowing the fight was just beginning. Lydia sat on the edge of her couch, the USB from Dax clutched in her hand like a grenade. That voicemail, Tate's voice, cold and commanding, played over and over in her head. Nathan hadn't just died, he'd been taken. The proof was right here, but so was the note still crumpled on her coffee table. Back off, or the kid's next. Ethan giggled in his high chair, smearing oatmeal on his cheeks, oblivious to the storm brewing. She couldn't let Tate touch him. Not ever. James paced near the window, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at Dax. Yeah, get the backups to my cloud. We're not losing this. He hung up, catching her stare. We're solid, Lydia. Voicemail, bank records, the hitman's trail. Cops can't ignore it now. She shook her head, voice low. Tate's got people everywhere. That note proves it. What if we hand this over and he walks? James crouched in front of her, eyes fierce. He won't. I've got a friend at the DA's office. Clean, hates guys like Tate. We go straight to her, bypass the dirty badges. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a cracked thing these days. 48 hours ago, you were just some guy buying my groceries. Now we're taking down a killer? He gave a half smile. Life's funny like that. 2 days later, they met the DA contact, Marissa, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense vibe in a parking garage away from prying eyes. She skimmed the files, her frown deepening. This is dynamite. Tate's done if it holds up. I'll push it through, but you two need to lay low. He's got claws. Lydia nodded, clutching Ethan's stroller. Just make it stick. Marissa pocketed the USB. Oh, it'll stick. That night, the news hit. Michael Tate arrested, fraud and murder charge. Lydia watched the TV, Tate in cuffs, and felt a weight lift, but not fully. Justice wasn't Nathan back. Ryan showed up the next morning, sheepish, hands stuffed in his pockets. Saw the news. You did it, huh? She didn't smile. We did it, but you're not off the hook. You started this mess. He nodded, eyes down. I'm turning myself in. Fraud, whatever they pin me with. Nathan deserved better than me hiding. She softened, just a fraction. He'd be glad you're owning it. Go see him at the cemetery after. Tell him yourself. Ryan swallowed hard and left, a ghost of the kid Nathan had tried to save. James stuck around, showing up with coffee or dragging Ethan to the park when Lydia needed a breather. One evening, a week after Tate's arrest, they ended up at the playground near her place. Ethan toddled around chasing a ball James had brought, an old one scuffed and faded. Nathan's, James said, handing it to her. Kept it from our pickup games in the valley. Figured Ethan should have it. She ran her fingers over it, picturing Nathan laughing, sweaty, alive. Tears hit before she could stop them. He never told me about that life. Any of it. James sat beside her on the bench, close but not crowding. He wanted you safe. Simple. That's who he was. She wiped her eyes, nodding. I hated him for it sometimes, keeping me in the dark. But I get it now, Ethan squealed, kicking the ball, and James jumped up to chase it with him. Lydia watched, a warmth creeping in she hadn't felt in months. James wasn't Nathan, didn't try to be, but he was here, steady, and damn if that didn't mean something. Later, back at her apartment, she made spaghetti while James kept Ethan entertained, building a wobbly tower of blocks. The kitchen smelled like garlic and normalcy, and for once, the silence wasn't heavy. You don't have to keep doing this, you know, she said, stirring the pot. Playing hero, he looked up, half a grin. Not hero stuff, just don't like seeing you carry it all alone. She set the spoon down, crossing her arms. And what's in it for you, James Carter? Guilt's paid off. Tate's gone. He stood, stepping closer, Ethan still giggling at his blocks. It's not about guilt anymore. It's you and him. He nodded at Ethan. I've seen you fight, Lydia, through losing Nathan, through this hell with Tate. You're tougher than anyone I've met. And I stick around because I want to, not because I owe anybody." Her breath hitched. She'd built walls so high after Nathan, but James had slipped through, quiet and persistent. "I'm not ready for whatever this is," she said, soft but honest. "Not yet." He nodded, no push. "I'm not going anywhere. We've got time." That night, after Ethan was down and James had left, Lydia sat with Nathan's ball, rolling it between her hands. She wasn't replacing him. She'd never could. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone anymore. Lydia stood in the doorway of her new apartment, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. It was a year since that night in the supermarket, since James Carter had turned her world upside down with a grocery bill and a ghost from Nathan's past. The place wasn't huge, 2 bedrooms, a tiny balcony, but it was hers, paid for with the settlement from Tate's conviction. No more double shifts at the bar, no more counting pennies for diapers. She'd landed a manager gig at a nicer spot downtown, decent hours, enough to breathe. Ethan toddled in, too now, dragging Nathan's old ball behind him like a security blanket. She heard James's footsteps before she saw him, hauling the last box from the truck. "That's it," he said, setting it down with a grunt. "You're officially moved in." He'd found this place a steal in his building, 1 floor down from his own. Not together, not yet, but close. She'd hesitated at first, pride prickling, but the shorter commute and the park nearby won her over. "Thanks," she said, watching Ethan bounce the ball off the wall. "Couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged, that easy grin tugging at her. Team effort. They headed to that park later, a Sunday ritual now. Ethan, all wobbly determination, gripped James's fingers as he took shaky steps across the grass. Lydia knelt a few feet away, arms out. "Come on, buddy, you've got this." 3 steps, then 4, his longest yet, before he tumbled into her hug, laughing like it was the best game ever. She scooped him up, kissing his messy curls, and caught James watching, eyes soft. "He's a fighter," he said, "like his dad." She smiled, bittersweet. "And his mom, maybe." They sat under a tree, Ethan napping in his stroller, the ball clutched tight. James stretched out beside her, quiet for once. "It's been a year today," she said, almost to herself, "since you showed up." He turned, surprised. "You kept track?" She nodded. "Hard to forget." "Thought you were trouble." He laughed. "Was I?" "Still deciding," she teased, but her voice softened. "I used to think losing Nathan was the end, like I'd never climb out. But this, us, Ethan, all of it, it's not the end. It's something new." James took her hand, thumb brushing hers. "You did the climbing, Lydia. I just held the rope sometimes." She squeezed back, letting the warmth settle. "I'm glad you did." Ethan stirred, blinking awake, and James scooped him up, bouncing him until giggles filled the air. Lydia watched, her chest full, not with grief, not anymore, but with something alive, something growing. Nathan was still there, in Ethan's smile, in that scuffed ball. But the future? That was hers to build, step by step, with a little help.